Sarah Miles swung her leg and kicked a 5-year-old black child square in the head. Right there in the middle of aisle 7, 30,000 feet above the ground, a grown woman in uniform attacked a sick little boy who couldn't stop coughing. The child screamed. His mother screamed. And every single passenger who saw it would never forget the sound. Within 30 minutes, Sarah Miles would lose everything. Her job, her license, her name erased from the airline industry forever. But what happened in those 30 minutes is a story you need to hear from beginning to end. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel right now, follow this story all the way through, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story reaches. Now let me take you back to where it all started. Rachel Carter woke up at 4:15 in the morning, and the first thing she did was press her hand against her son's forehead. He was burning up. Not the kind of warm that makes a mother pause and think, maybe it's nothing. This was the kind of heat that made her stomach drop. Jalen was 5 years old, and for the last 3 weeks, he had been getting worse. The doctors back home in Detroit had done what they could, but they told Rachel the truth. Jalen needed to see a specialist in Atlanta. There was a pediatric neurologist there, one of the best in the country, and Jalen's condition wasn't going to wait. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her son sleeping. His little chest rose and fell in an uneven rhythm. His lips were cracked. His fingers twitched every few seconds, a side effect of the medication that was supposed to help, but never seemed to do enough. She whispered to him, "We're going to get you better, baby. Mama's got you." She had scraped together every dollar she had for these plane tickets. She worked 2 jobs, one at a grocery store and one cleaning office buildings at night. There was no savings account. There was no backup plan. There was just a mother who refused to let her child suffer without a fight. By 6:30, they were at the airport. Jalen was awake, but barely. He leaned into Rachel's side like he didn't have the strength to hold himself up. She carried their one bag over her shoulder and held him close with her free arm. People moved around them fast, rolling suitcases, talking on phones, rushing to catch flights. Nobody looked at them twice. Nobody noticed the little boy whose eyes were glassy with fever, or the mother whose jaw was tight with worry. They checked in. They got through security. Rachel bought Jalen a small bottle of water and a pack of crackers, even though she knew he probably wouldn't eat them. She sat him down at the gate, and he leaned his head against her arm. "Mama, my head hurts," he said quietly. "I know, sweetheart. I know it does. We just got to get on this plane, and then we're going to see the doctor who's going to help you feel better. Can you be brave for Mama?" Jalen nodded slowly. "I'll try." Rachel kissed the top of his head. His hair was soft and freshly braided. She had done it herself the night before, even though her fingers ached from a 10-hour shift. She wanted him to look nice. She wanted him to feel like everything was normal, even though nothing about their life had been normal for months. When the boarding announcement came, Rachel gathered their things and held Jalen's hand as they walked down the jetway. He was slow. His steps were small and unsteady. A man behind them sighed loudly, and Rachel felt the heat of embarrassment rise in her chest. But she didn't turn around. She kept her eyes forward and her hand firm around Jalen's. They found their seats, row 23, middle, and window. Rachel lifted Jalen into the window seat and buckled him in. He pressed his face against the cold plastic of the window and closed his eyes. She sat down next to him and took a deep breath. They had made it this far. Just a 2-hour flight. Just 2 hours, and they would be in Atlanta. The plane filled up quickly. Rachel watched the passengers file in, stuffing bags into overhead bins, arguing over armrests, scrolling through phones. She noticed the flight attendants moving up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts, closing bins, smiling at passengers. One of them caught Rachel's eye, a woman with blonde hair pulled back tight, thin lips pressed into a line that wasn't quite a smile. Her name tag read, Sarah Miles. Sarah moved through the cabin with a kind of authority that felt sharp. She didn't greet passengers the way the other attendants did. She pointed, she directed, she corrected. When a man in row 12 didn't put his bag under the seat fast enough, Sarah snapped, "Sir, we need to push back on time. Bag under the seat, now." The man blinked and shoved his bag down without a word. Rachel watched this and felt a small knot form in her stomach. She had learned a long time ago to recognize a certain kind of person, the kind who carried their power like a weapon, the kind who looked for reasons to use it. The plane pushed back from the gate. Jalen stirred and let out a small whimper. Rachel put her hand on his leg. "Shh, baby, we're just moving. We're going to fly soon." Jalen opened his eyes. They were red and watery. "I don't feel good, Mama." "I know. Just close your eyes. I'm right here." The plane taxied to the runway. The engines roared. Jalen grabbed Rachel's arm and held on tight as the plane lifted off the ground. The pressure change hit him immediately. He cried out and pressed both hands against his ears. Rachel pulled him close and rocked him gently. "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. A few passengers glanced over. Some looked concerned, some looked annoyed. One woman across the aisle smiled sympathetically and mouthed, "He'll be okay." Rachel nodded gratefully. 20 minutes into the flight, Jalen started coughing. Not a small, polite cough. It was deep and wet and rattled in his chest like something was loose inside him. He couldn't stop. His small body shook with every cough, and tears streamed down his face. Rachel grabbed the water bottle and held it to his lips. "Drink, baby. Small sips. Come on." He tried, but the coughing wouldn't let him. Water dribbled down his chin. Rachel wiped it with her sleeve and pressed the call button above her head. Nobody came. She pressed it again. Still nothing. Rachel unbuckled herself and leaned into the aisle, looking toward the front of the cabin. She saw Sarah Miles standing near the galley, talking to another flight attendant. Rachel waved her hand. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I get some help, please?" Sarah looked at her. The expression on her face didn't change. She didn't move. She said something to the other attendant, and the other attendant glanced toward Rachel, then looked away. Sarah picked up a clipboard and began writing something. Rachel's heart pounded. She pressed the call button a third time. "Please," she said louder. "My son is sick. He needs help." This time Sarah walked over. She didn't rush. She moved at her own pace, her shoes clicking on the floor of the aisle. When she reached row 23, she looked down at Jalen, who was still coughing and now curled into a ball in his seat, his face buried in Rachel's jacket. "What's the problem?" Sarah asked. Her voice was flat, not concerned, not even curious, just flat. "My son has a medical condition. He's having a bad episode. Can you bring me some warm water and maybe an extra blanket? He's shaking." Sarah looked at Jalen for a long moment. Then she looked at Rachel. "Is he contagious?" Rachel blinked. "What?" "Is he contagious? Because if he's contagious, he shouldn't be on this flight." "He's not contagious. He has a neurological condition. We're flying to Atlanta to see a specialist. I just need some warm water and a blanket." Sarah crossed her arms. "Ma'am, we're not equipped to handle medical situations in the air. If your son is this sick, you should have made other arrangements." Rachel felt something snap inside her chest. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Something that tasted like every time someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the effort. She kept her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to treat him. I'm asking for water and a blanket. That's all." Sarah stared at her for another second, then turned and walked away without a word. Rachel sat there, holding her son, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Jalen's coughing had slowed to a ragged wheeze, but he was still trembling. Rachel could feel his heartbeat against her chest, fast and uneven. The woman across the aisle, the one who had smiled earlier, leaned over. "Honey, do you need my blanket? I've got one right here." Rachel looked at her, and her eyes filled with tears. Thank you so much." The woman handed over a blue fleece blanket, and Rachel wrapped it around Jalen. He clutched it with both hands and pressed himself deeper into his mother's side. 15 minutes later, Sarah came back. She was carrying a small cup of water. Not warm, cold. She set it on the armrest without looking at Rachel. "There you go," she said, already turning to leave. "I asked for warm water," Rachel said. Sarah stopped. She turned back around slowly. "You got water. That's what we have. My son is sick and he's cold. Warm water would help, please." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I've already gone out of my way to accommodate you. I suggest you be grateful for what you get." The words hit Rachel like a slap. Be grateful. She had heard those words before, in different forms, from different mouths. Be grateful we let you in. Be grateful we gave you a chance. Be grateful we didn't ignore you completely. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Jalen chose that moment to sit up. The coughing had stopped, but he was restless. His medication made him fidgety when the fever was high, and his little body couldn't stay still. He shifted in his seat, kicking his legs against the seat in front of him. His arms moved in jerky, uncontrolled motions. It wasn't bad behavior, it was a symptom. Anyone who looked closely could see that. His eyes were unfocused, his movements were involuntary. To rest, and he's kicking the seat. Make to rest, and he's kicking the seat. Make him stop. Rachel put her hands on Jalen's legs and gently held them. Jalen, baby, try to keep still. I know it's hard. Jalen looked up at her with confused, feverish eyes. I'm trying, Mama. My legs won't listen. The man in the seat in front of them turned around. He was middle-aged, with gray hair and reading glasses. He looked at Jalen, and his face softened. Hey, little man, you're doing fine. Don't worry about it. Sarah shot the man a look. Sir, please face forward. The man frowned. The kid's obviously not feeling well. Why don't you cut them some slack? Sir, I'm handling this. Face forward. Sarah's voice had an edge now, a warning. The man held up his hands and turned around, but Rachel could see his jaw tighten. He wasn't happy. Neither were several other passengers who had been watching the exchange. A woman 3 rows back shook her head in disgust. A young couple near the front craned their necks to see what was happening. Sarah stood over Rachel and Jalen like a guard tower. Her shadow fell across the little boy, and he looked up at her with wide, scared eyes. He didn't understand why this woman kept coming back. He didn't understand why she was angry. All he knew was that his head hurt and his body wouldn't listen to him, and this lady in the blue uniform looked at him like he was something to be removed. Mama, Jalen whispered, she's scary. Rachel pulled him closer. Don't look at her, baby. Look at Mama. Just look at me. Sarah heard the boy. Something flickered across her face, something dark and quick, and then it was gone. She leaned down, her face inches from Rachel's. You have one more chance to get him under control. If he keeps disrupting this cabin, I will have you removed when we land, and I will file a report. Rachel met her eyes. My son is 5 years old, and he is sick. What kind of report are you going to file against a 5-year-old? Sarah straightened up. The kind that makes sure people like you think twice before flying. People like you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rachel felt them settle on her skin. She knew exactly what Sarah meant. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for misunderstanding. People like you. A man across the aisle, a black man in a business suit, looked up from his laptop. He had been quiet until now. He took off his headphones and said, very calmly, I heard what you just said. You might want to rethink your choice of words. Sarah glanced at him. This doesn't concern you, sir. It concerns every person on this plane when a flight attendant threatens a mother and her sick child. And it absolutely concerns me when the language you choose sounds exactly like what I think it sounds like. The tension in the cabin thickened. More passengers were paying attention now. Phones were being picked up, not to scroll through apps, but to record. A teenager in row 18 held his phone steady, the camera pointed directly at Sarah. A woman behind him did the same. Sarah noticed the phones. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. She straightened her uniform jacket and took a half step back. I'm simply doing my job. If anyone has a complaint, they can file it after we land. She turned and walked toward the front of the cabin. Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at Jalen, who had gone quiet. His eyes were half closed, his body still twitching, but the fear on his face was worse than any symptom. Mama, did I do something bad? No, baby, you didn't do anything bad. Not one thing. Then why is she mad at me? Rachel's throat tightened. She couldn't answer. She just held him and rocked him gently and prayed that the remaining hour of the flight would pass without another incident. For 30 minutes, it did. The plane hummed, passengers settled. Jalen drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. Rachel kept her hand on his back, feeling every breath, counting every heartbeat. Then the seatbelt sign came on. The captain announced they were beginning their descent into Atlanta. Rachel leaned down and whispered, "Almost there, Jalen. We're almost there." Jalen stirred and sat up. The pressure change hit him again, and his eyes went wide with pain. He clutched his ears and let out a cry that silenced the passengers around them. His body jerked and his legs kicked out involuntarily, catching the seat back in front of him. The man in front didn't complain. He turned around and said, "You're okay, buddy. It's just the airplane going down. It'll stop soon." But Sarah Miles was already moving down the aisle. She had heard the cry. She had seen the movement. And something in her, something that had been building for the entire flight, something ugly and uncontrolled, was ready to break through. She reached row 23. She looked at Jalen, whose body was convulsing slightly, whose tears were streaming down his face, whose small hands were pressed so hard against his ears that his knuckles were white. And Rachel saw it happen. She saw the decision form on Sarah's face before the action followed. She saw the tightening of the jaw, the shift of weight, the coiling of the body. "No," Rachel said. "Don't you dare." Sarah's right foot came up. It was fast. It was deliberate. It connected with the side of Jalen's head with a force that snapped the boy's neck to the side. The sound was sharp and sickening, a dull crack that seemed to echo through the entire cabin. Jalen didn't scream. He went silent. His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp against the window. Rachel screamed. It was a sound that came from somewhere beyond her chest, beyond her throat. It was primal and raw, and it filled the cabin like a siren. She threw herself over her son, covering him with her body, and she screamed again and again. The cabin erupted. The man in front jumped out of his seat. The businessman across the aisle stood up. The teenager with the phone had caught every second. The woman 3 rows back was already on her feet, shouting, "She kicked that child! That woman kicked that baby in the head!" Passengers rushed forward. Someone grabbed Sarah's arm. She tried to pull away, but 2 men were already blocking the aisle. A woman was calling for the other flight attendants. Voices crashed over each other like waves. "Did you see that? She kicked him! Somebody call the captain. Get her away from that child! I got it on video. I got the whole thing." Sarah's face was white. Her eyes darted left and right like a trapped animal. She tried to speak. He was kicking the seat. I didn't mean to. "You kicked a child in the head," the businessman roared. "We all saw it. Every single one of us." The other flight attendants rushed down the aisle. One of them, a younger woman named Maria, saw Jalen slumped against the window and immediately knelt beside Rachel. "Ma'am, is he breathing? Let me see him." Rachel's hands were shaking so badly she could barely move. She lifted herself off Jalen. His eyes were closed. A mark was already forming on the side of his head, red and angry. But his chest was moving. He was breathing. "He's breathing," Maria said. "We need to keep him still. Sir, can you get me the first aid kit from overhead bin 3? The gray-haired man was already reaching for it. Sarah stood in the aisle, frozen. The passengers surrounding her were not touching her, but they had formed a wall. Nobody was going to let her walk away. Nobody was going to let her disappear into the galley and pretend this didn't happen. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "This is Captain Williams. I've been informed of an incident in the cabin. We are 7 minutes from landing. All passengers, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendant Miles, report to the front of the aircraft immediately." Sarah didn't move. "Go," the businessman said quietly. His voice was low and dangerous. "Go to the front of this plane and pray to God that boy is okay." Sarah walked forward on shaking legs. Every passenger she passed stared at her, some with anger, some with disbelief, some with the kind of quiet fury that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. In row 23, Rachel held her son. Jalen had opened his eyes. He was dazed, confused, and the left side of his head was swelling. He looked up at his mother and said the words that would break every heart that heard them when the video hit the internet 45 minutes later. "Mama, why did the lady hurt me? Was I bad?" Rachel's tears fell onto his face. She wiped them away with her thumb. "No, baby, you were never bad. You are the best boy in the whole world. You hear me? The best boy." Maria stayed with them for the remaining minutes of the flight. She held an ice pack against Jalen's head and spoke to him softly. "You're so brave," she told him. "You're doing so great." The plane touched down in Atlanta. It was the roughest landing Rachel had ever felt, but she barely noticed. All she could feel was her son's small body against hers and the rage that was building inside her. Not the wild, screaming kind, but the cold, steady kind. The kind that doesn't burn out. The kind that doesn't stop until it gets what it came for. The plane taxied to the gate. The seatbelt sign turned off. Nobody moved. For a long moment, the entire cabin sat in silence. Then the captain's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Airport authorities are boarding the aircraft. There has been a serious incident, and we need everyone to cooperate fully." 2 police officers and a paramedic stepped onto the plane. The first officer moved to the front where Sarah was standing with the lead flight attendant. The second officer and the paramedic went straight to row 23. The paramedic knelt beside Jalen. "Hey there, little man. I'm going to check you out, okay? Can you tell me your name?" Jalen looked at the paramedic and then at his mother. Rachel nodded. "It's okay. Tell him your name." "Jalen," the boy whispered. "Jalen, that's a strong name. Can you squeeze my fingers?" "Good. Can you follow this light with your eyes?" "Great job." The paramedic looked at Rachel. "We're going to want to take him to the hospital for a full evaluation. There's likely a concussion, and given his existing condition, we want to be thorough." Rachel nodded. She couldn't speak anymore. The words had run out. All that was left was the cold fire in her chest and the feel of her son's hand in hers. As they moved toward the front of the plane, Rachel passed Sarah Miles. Sarah was standing against the galley wall, flanked by a police officer. Her face was blank. Her hands were at her sides. She didn't look at Rachel, but Rachel stopped. She stopped right in front of Sarah and waited until the woman's eyes lifted. "You kicked my child," Rachel said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was steady and clear, and it carried to every ear in that cabin. "You kicked my sick baby in the head because he bothered you. And you think this is over, but I promise you, on everything I love, this is just beginning." Sarah opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Rachel turned and walked off the plane with Jalen in her arms. The passengers watched her go. Some were crying, some were still holding their phones up. One elderly woman reached out and touched Rachel's arm as she passed. "God bless you, sweetheart. God bless that boy." Rachel didn't stop. She kept walking, through the jetway, into the terminal, toward the paramedics waiting with a stretcher. She laid Jalen down gently and watched them strap him in. And somewhere behind her, still on that plane, 14 different passengers were uploading the same video to the internet. 14 different angles of the same unforgivable moment. And the world was about to watch. The first video hit Twitter at 11:47 a.m. By 11:52, it had 40,000 views. By noon, it had crossed 1 million. By 12:15, every major news network in America had it on their screens, and the name Sarah Miles was trending in all 50 states. The clock was ticking, and Sarah Miles had no idea that in less than 30 minutes, her entire life was about to be erased from the industry she thought would protect her. Rachel sat in the back of the ambulance holding Jalen's hand, and she felt her phone buzzing in her pocket, over and over and over. She didn't answer it. She didn't need to. She knew what was happening. She could feel it in the air, the same way you feel a storm before the first drop of rain. The world was waking up, and it was angry. Rachel's phone would not stop buzzing. It vibrated against her thigh like a heartbeat that wasn't hers, steady and relentless, while the ambulance cut through Atlanta traffic with its sirens wailing. She didn't look at it. She couldn't take her eyes off Jalen. He was strapped to the stretcher, an oxygen mask over his small face, his eyes half open and staring at the ceiling like he was trying to remember where he was. The paramedic checked his pupils with a pen light and wrote something on a clipboard. And Rachel wanted to ask what he wrote, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was hold Jalen's hand and squeeze it every few seconds so he knew she was there. "Mama," Jalen said through the mask, his voice muffled and thin. "Are we at the doctor yet?" "Almost, baby. We're almost there." He closed his eyes. The swelling on the left side of his head had turned a deep purple, and every time Rachel looked at it, she felt the rage climb higher in her chest. Not the shaking, screaming kind. The kind that sits still and waits and remembers everything. At 12:03 p.m., the ambulance pulled into Grady Memorial Hospital. The doors flew open, and 2 nurses were already there, pulling the stretcher out, moving fast. Rachel jumped down and followed them through the emergency entrance. A nurse turned to her and said, "Ma'am, are you his mother?" "Yes." "What happened?" "A flight attendant kicked him in the head." The nurse stopped walking. She looked at Rachel like she hadn't heard correctly. "She did what?" "She kicked my 5-year-old son in the head on the plane. He has a neurological condition. He was having an episode, and she kicked him." The nurse's face changed. Something hardened behind her eyes, the professional mask cracking for just a second before she pulled it back together. "We're going to take care of him. I need you to fill out these forms. Can you do that for me?" Rachel took the clipboard. Her hands were shaking so badly the pen skipped across the page. She wrote Jalen's name, his date of birth, his medical history. Under reason for visit, she wrote, "Assault by airline employee," and the pen tore through the paper. At 12:11 p.m., while Rachel sat in the emergency room waiting area trying to hold herself together, her phone buzzed again. This time, she looked. There were 47 missed calls, 31 text messages, 19 voicemails, and a notification from Twitter that said her name was trending. She opened the app, and the first thing she saw was a video. It was shaky, filmed from a few rows behind her seat, and it showed everything. It showed Sarah Miles walking down the aisle. It showed the kick. It showed Jalen's body going limp. It showed Rachel throwing herself over her son. The video had been posted 40 minutes ago, and it already had 2.3 million views. Rachel dropped the phone in her lap. She covered her mouth with both hands and sobbed. Not because the video was out there, but because watching it from the outside, watching it happen to her son from a stranger's camera angle, made it real in a way that living through it hadn't. She could see how small Jalen was. She could see how big Sarah's foot was. She could see the exact moment her baby's head snapped sideways, and it was worse than she remembered. It was so much worse. A woman sitting 2 chairs away reached over and put a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Breathe, sweetheart, just breathe." Rachel couldn't breathe. She could barely see. The tears came, and they didn't stop. At 12:17 p.m., 600 miles north, in the corporate headquarters of Skyline Airlines in Charlotte, North Carolina, a phone rang on the desk of Mark Davidson, Chief Executive Officer. His assistant's voice came through the intercom, tight and urgent. "Mr. Davidson, you need to turn on the news, right now." Mark Davidson was 58 years old. He had been running Skyline for 11 years. He had handled labor disputes, mechanical failures, a near bankruptcy during the pandemic, and a public relations nightmare when a pilot showed up drunk to a flight in 2019. He thought he had seen everything. He picked up the remote and turned on the television mounted on his office wall. The video was playing on CNN. It was playing on MSNBC. It was playing on Fox News. Every single channel had the same footage, the same sickening moment, frozen and replayed and zoomed in and analyzed from every angle. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Skyline flight attendant caught on video kicking child in head." Mark's hand tightened around the remote until his knuckles turned white. He watched the video once. He watched it twice. Then he picked up his phone and called his head of operations. "Get me everything on a flight attendant named Sarah Miles. Everything, right now, and get legal on the line. I want them in my office in 5 minutes." "Sir, the switchboard is already lighting up. We've got media calling from every 5 minutes. Everyone in my office, move." At 12:21 p.m., the hashtag Justice for Jalen hit the #1 trending spot on Twitter. It wasn't just Americans. It was people from London, Paris, Lagos, Tokyo. The video had crossed every border and every language. A clip of Jalen whispering, "Mama, why did the lady hurt me?" had been isolated and shared separately, and it had already been viewed 9 million times. Grown men were posting videos of themselves crying after watching it. Mothers were holding their children tighter and writing paragraphs about what they would have done to Sarah Miles if they had been on that plane. At 12:24 p.m., Rachel's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. She answered it because at this point, anything could be news about Jalen. Ms. Carter, this is Angela Price. I'm an attorney with the firm Mitchell & Associates here in Atlanta. I've seen the video, and I want you to know that I am willing to represent you and your son free of charge. What was done to Jalen is not just wrong, it's criminal, and I intend to make sure that woman and that airline are held fully accountable. Rachel pressed the phone against her ear. How did you get my number? A passenger on your flight posted about the incident and shared your information. I hope that's okay. Ms. Carter, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to hear me. Do not speak to the airline. Do not speak to any representatives they send to the hospital. Do not sign anything. Can you promise me that? I won't sign anything. Good. I'm on my way to you right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Rachel hung up and stared at the wall. She felt like she was standing in the middle of a highway, watching traffic come from both directions. Everything was moving so fast. The video, the calls, the attorney, the hospital. And all she wanted was someone to come out of those double doors and tell her that her son was going to be okay. At 12:29 p.m., a doctor came out. He was young, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a calm voice. Ms. Carter, I'm Dr. Okafor. Your son has a concussion, grade 2. Given his pre-existing neurological condition, we want to keep him overnight for observation. The swelling is significant, but manageable. We've started him on anti-inflammatory medication, and we're monitoring his intracranial pressure. Is he going to be okay? Dr. Okafor paused, and in that pause, Rachel felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He's stable. The next 24 hours are critical because of his underlying condition. The impact could exacerbate his symptoms. We're watching him very closely. You can see him now. Rachel followed the doctor through the doors and down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Jalen was in a small room, lying in a bed that was too big for him. Wires connected him to a monitor that beeped softly. His eyes were open, and when he saw Rachel, he lifted his arms. She ran to him. She held him so gently it hurt, like holding something made of glass and light. I'm here, baby. Mama's right here. My head still hurts. I know. The medicine is going to help. You just rest. Can we still see the doctor? The one who's going to fix me? Rachel's chest cracked open. Through everything, through the kick and the ambulance and the hospital and the chaos, Jalen was still thinking about the appointment. He was still thinking about getting better. He was 5 years old, and he still believed that the world had a plan for him that included healing. She kissed his forehead right above the bruise. Yes, baby, we're still going to see the doctor, I promise. At 12:33 p.m., back at Skyline headquarters, Mark Davidson stood at the head of a conference table surrounded by 8 people: his head of operations, his chief legal officer, his VP of communications, 2 PR consultants, and 3 members of the executive board who had called in on speakerphone. The television on the wall was still playing the video on a loop. Tell me exactly what happened on that plane, Mark said. His voice was low, controlled, and terrifying. The head of operations, a woman named Linda Chen, read from a report that had been compiled in the last 15 minutes. Flight 417, Detroit to Atlanta, departed at 8:45 a.m. Flight attendant Sarah Miles, employee for 6 years, assigned to economy cabin. A passenger, Rachel Carter, requested assistance for her child, who has a neurological condition. Multiple witnesses report that Miles was dismissive and hostile. At approximately 9:50 a.m. during descent, Miles kicked the child in the head. Kicked. Yes, sir, kicked. There are at least 14 videos from passengers confirming this. The child was transported by ambulance to Grady Memorial upon landing. Mark pressed his palms flat on the table. Has Miles made a statement? She's been detained at the airport by local police. She told the responding officers that she, quote, accidentally made contact with the child while trying to get past him in the aisle. The chief legal officer, a man named Robert Haynes, let out a short, bitter laugh. Accidentally. The video shows her planting her foot and swinging. That's not accidental contact. That's assault on a minor. Mark looked at the television. The video played again. He watched Sarah's foot connect with Jalen's head, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Deep, personal shame that this woman wore his airline's uniform when she did that. "What's our exposure?" he asked. Robert leaned forward. "Criminal charges are likely. The family will almost certainly file a civil suit, and they'll win. The NAACP has already issued a statement calling for a federal investigation. 3 members of Congress have tweeted about it in the last 10 minutes. Our stock is down 4% and falling. Every major news outlet is requesting a comment." "Mark, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to this airline." Mark nodded. "Fire her. Already drafted the termination letter. I didn't say draft. I said fire her. Right now, this minute. And I want her credentials pulled. I want her name submitted to the FAA with a recommendation for permanent blacklisting. I don't want her serving drinks on a crop duster, Robert. She is done." The VP of Communications, a woman named Patricia Wells, raised her hand. "Mark, we need to be careful about the optics of how we handle this. If we move too fast..." "Patricia, a woman in my company's uniform kicked a sick black child in the head on camera. 14 cameras. The video has been seen by what? How many now?" Linda checked her phone. 12 million views across platforms, as of 1 minute ago. 12 million people have watched my employee assault a child. There is no version of this where we move too slow. Fire her. Pull her credentials. Put out a statement in the next 10 minutes. And somebody get the family's contact information. I want to call the mother personally. At 12:38 p.m., a press release went out from Skyline Airlines. It was 4 paragraphs long, and it said everything that needed to be said. It confirmed that Sarah Miles had been terminated immediately. It confirmed that her credentials had been revoked, and that the airline had petitioned the FAA for her permanent removal from the industry. It confirmed that Skyline would cooperate fully with law enforcement and would cover all medical expenses for the child. And in the final paragraph, Mark Davidson's name was attached to a personal statement that read in part that what happened on that flight was an unconscionable act of violence against a defenseless child, and that Skyline Airlines bore full responsibility for allowing it to happen. The statement hit the news at 12:40 p.m. Within minutes, it was everywhere. But it wasn't enough. The public wanted more. They wanted Sarah Miles to answer for what she did. They wanted to see her face and hear her explain how a grown woman, a trained professional, could look at a sick child and decide that the appropriate response was violence. At 12:42 p.m. at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Sarah Miles sat in a small room with gray walls and no windows. 2 police officers stood by the door. Her uniform jacket was wrinkled. Her hair, which had been pulled back tight that morning, had come loose on one side. She stared at the table in front of her and picked at a hangnail on her left thumb. A detective walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that gave away nothing. He sat down across from her and opened a folder. "Ms. Miles, I'm Detective James Howard. I need to ask you some questions about what occurred on Flight 417. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights?" Sarah nodded. "I need a verbal answer, ma'am." "Yes, I understand." "Tell me what happened with the child in row 23. Sarah's eyes darted to the left. "I was doing my job. The child was disruptive. He was kicking the seat and making noise, and his mother wasn't controlling him. I asked her multiple times to get him under control, and she refused." "And what did you do?" "I was trying to get past him in the aisle, and my foot accidentally caught his head." Detective Howard opened the folder and placed a still frame from the video on the table. It showed Sarah's leg extended, her foot against Jalen's head, her body angled forward in a motion that could not be mistaken for anything accidental. "Ms. Miles, I have 14 separate video recordings of this incident. I've watched each one multiple times. In not one of them does this look like an accident." Sarah stared at the photo. Her lip trembled. "It happened fast. I didn't mean to..." "You didn't mean to kick a 5-year-old child in the head?" "He was in my way. He wouldn't stop moving. I just reacted." "You reacted by kicking a sick child." Sarah's face crumbled. She put her hands over her eyes and her shoulders shook. But Detective Howard noticed something. There were no tears. Her eyes were dry. The shaking was there. The sounds were there. But the tears were not. "Ms. Miles, were you aware that the child had a medical condition?" His mother said something about it, but I don't remember exactly. She told you he had a neurological condition. Multiple witnesses confirm this. Did that information factor into how you chose to respond? I didn't choose to respond any particular way. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Ms. Miles. A foot doesn't accidentally swing into a child's head. I want to give you a chance to tell me the truth before this goes any further. Because right now, you're looking at felony assault charges on a minor. In the state of Georgia, that carries up to 20 years. Sarah's hands dropped from her face. The color drained from her skin. 20 years? Up to. And given that this incident occurred in an enclosed aircraft, there may be additional federal charges. The FBI has been notified. Ms. Miles, this is very serious. I suggest you start telling me what really happened on that plane. Sarah's mouth opened and closed. She looked like a fish pulled out of water, gasping at air that couldn't save her. "I want a lawyer," she whispered. "That's your right. We'll pause until your attorney arrives." Detective Howard closed the folder and stood up. At the door, he turned back. "One more thing, Ms. Miles. There are witnesses who heard you say 'people like you' to the child's mother. Can you tell me what you meant by that?" Sarah said nothing. "I didn't think so." He walked out and closed the door behind him. At 12:51 p.m., Angela Price arrived at Grady Memorial Hospital. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a briefcase that looked like it had been through a war. She found Rachel in Jalen's room, sitting beside the bed, holding his hand while he slept. Angela stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the scene, and then she stepped inside and spoke quietly. "Ms. Carter, I'm Angela." Rachel looked up. Her eyes were swollen and red. "He's sleeping. The doctor says the next 24 hours are critical." Angela sat down in the chair beside Rachel. "I've reviewed the video. I've spoken with 3 of the passengers who were on that flight, and I've already been contacted by 2 civil rights organizations who want to support your case. Ms. Carter, what happened to Jalen is not going to be swept under the rug. That airline and that woman are going to face consequences that they will feel for the rest of their lives." Rachel looked at her son. The monitor beeped steadily. The bruise on his head was darkening. "I don't care about the airline," Rachel said. "I don't care about money. I care that my son came to Atlanta to see a doctor who could help him, and instead he's in an emergency room with a concussion. I care that a woman looked at my baby and saw something she could hurt. That's what I care about." Angela nodded. "Then that's what we'll fight for." At 12:58 p.m., Rachel's phone rang. She looked at the number. It was a Charlotte area code. She answered. "Ms. Carter, this is Mark Davidson. I'm the CEO of Skyline Airlines. I'm calling to tell you personally that Sarah Miles has been terminated and that her name has been submitted for permanent removal from the airline industry. I am also calling to tell you that what happened to your son on my airline is the most shameful thing I have witnessed in my career. I don't have words that are adequate, but I want you to know that I am not calling to protect my company. I'm calling because I have a son too. He's 7, and the thought of someone doing to him what was done to Jalen makes me physically ill. Whatever you and your family need, you have my personal guarantee that Skyline will provide it." Rachel listened. She held the phone against her ear and looked at Jalen and felt the tears come again. "Mr. Davidson, your employee called me 'people like you.' She looked at my son, my sick, helpless little boy, and she kicked him in the head. You can fire her, you can pull her credentials, you can send all the statements you want, but what you cannot do is undo what she did. My son is lying in a hospital bed because your airline failed him. So when you say whatever we need, I need you to understand that what we need is something you can't give us. We need the last 4 hours back." The line was silent for a long moment. When Mark spoke again, his voice was thick. "You're right, and I'm sorry." Rachel hung up. She set the phone down on the bed and pressed her face against Jalen's blanket and let the silence hold her. At 1:07 p.m., the FAA issued an emergency statement confirming that Sarah Miles's flight attendant certification had been revoked effective immediately. It was the fastest revocation in the agency's history. Within the hour, 3 other airlines that Sarah had previously applied to issued public statements confirming that she would never be considered for employment with their companies. At 1:12 p.m., the video crossed 50 million views. At 1:15 p.m., the NAACP called a press conference. At 1:19 p.m., 2 members of Congress called for a hearing on airline treatment of passengers of color. And in a small hospital room in Atlanta, Jalen Carter opened his eyes, looked at his mother, and said, "Mama, I'm hungry." Rachel laughed. It was a broken, beautiful, exhausted laugh that came out of her like something that had been trapped for hours. She wiped her face and kissed his hand. "Okay, baby, let's get you something to eat." The world outside was on fire, but in that room, for just one moment, a mother and her son were doing the only thing that mattered. They were holding on to each other, and they were not letting go. Jalen ate half a cup of applesauce and 3 bites of a turkey sandwich before he fell asleep again. Rachel sat beside him with her hand on his chest, counting his breaths, and every time the monitor beeped a little differently, she felt her stomach lurch. Angela Price had stepped into the hallway to make phone calls, and Rachel could hear fragments of her voice through the cracked door. Words like federal jurisdiction and civil complaint and press conference that sounded like they belonged to someone else's life. At 1:32 p.m., a nurse came in to check Jalen's vitals. She moved quietly, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his thin arm, and when she saw Rachel's face, she stopped what she was doing. "When's the last time you ate something, Mama?" Rachel shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been in this chair for over an hour, and you look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. There's a cafeteria on the first floor. I'll sit right here with him. He won't be alone for 1 second. I can't leave him." The nurse put her hand on Rachel's arm. "Honey, you can't take care of him if you fall apart. 10 minutes. Go eat something. Drink some water. I promise you. If anything changes, I will come find you myself." Rachel looked at Jalen. His breathing was steady. The monitor beeped in a rhythm she had memorized. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff and aching, and walked to the door. She turned back once. "If he wakes up and asks for me, I'll tell him Mama went to get him a surprise. Go." Rachel walked out of the room and down the hallway. She didn't go to the cafeteria. She went to the bathroom. She locked the door, turned on the faucet, and screamed into her hands. She screamed until her throat burned and her lungs ached, and then she screamed some more. She screamed for Jalen. She screamed for every moment of the last 6 hours. She screamed for the sound of Sarah's foot hitting her son's head, a sound she would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. When she was done, she washed her face, dried her hands, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen. Her lips were cracked. The braids she had done that morning were starting to fray. She looked like a woman who had been through a war. And she was. She straightened her shoulders, unlocked the door, and walked out. Angela was waiting for her in the hallway. "Rachel, we need to talk." "What happened?" "2 things. First, Detective Howard from the airport just called me. Sarah Miles has officially been charged with felony aggravated assault on a minor. Her bond hearing is set for tomorrow morning." Rachel nodded. She felt nothing. The word felony should have made her feel something, relief or satisfaction or vindication. But all she felt was hollow. "What's the second thing?" Angela's expression shifted. "Skyline Airlines wants to offer a settlement. They reached out to me 15 minutes ago. They're offering $1.2 million for you to sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree not to pursue further legal action." Rachel stared at her. $1.2 million. Yes. To keep my mouth shut. That's what a non-disclosure agreement means, yes. Rachel leaned against the wall. $1.2 million. She had $412 in her checking account. She owed 3 months of rent. Jalen's medical bills were already over $40,000 and climbing. $1.2 million would change everything. It would pay for his specialist. It would pay for a house. It would pay for a life where she didn't have to work 2 jobs and still fall short. Angela watched her carefully. "Rachel, I want you to take your time with this. You don't have to decide anything right now." "What do you think I should do?" I think their offer tells us they're terrified. A company doesn't put $1.2 million on the table within 3 hours of an incident unless they know the real number is much higher. I think if we go to trial, we're looking at 8 to 10 million, possibly more given the video, the public response, and the clear racial element. But I also think that's your decision, not mine. This is about what you need and what you want for Jaylen. Rachel closed her eyes. She thought about the money. She thought about what it could do. And then she thought about Sarah Miles standing over her son, leaning down with that look on her face, saying, "People like you." She thought about every parent who had ever been told to be grateful, every child who had ever been treated like a problem because of the color of their skin, every mother who had ever swallowed her rage because she couldn't afford to let it out. "Tell them no," Rachel said. Angela nodded once. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. My son's face is on every screen in America right now. People are watching. If I take their money and disappear, what message does that send? That you can kick a black child in the head and write a check and it goes away? No. Tell them no. Tell them I'll see them in court." Angela allowed herself a small smile. "I'll make the call." At 1:58 p.m., the news broke that Skyline's settlement offer had been rejected. Nobody knew how the information leaked, but it hit social media like gasoline on a fire. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. People praised Rachel's courage. They called her a warrior. They called her the mother America needed. A GoFundMe page that had been set up by a stranger 2 hours earlier crossed $500,000. At 2:04 p.m., Sarah Miles's mugshot was released. It showed a woman who looked nothing like the sharp, composed flight attendant from the morning. Her hair was disheveled. Her eyes were hollow. The corners of her mouth pulled downward in an expression that could have been shame or self-pity. And the internet didn't care which one it was. The mugshot was everywhere within minutes, plastered on every news site, shared millions of times on social media, turned into memes that ranged from furious to merciless. At 2:11 p.m., something unexpected happened. A woman named Karen Delgado posted a video on Facebook. She was crying. She identified herself as a former Skyline flight attendant who had worked with Sarah Miles for 3 years. "I need people to know something," Karen said, her voice breaking. "What Sarah did today is not new behavior. She has been targeting passengers of color for years. I reported her twice, once in 2021 and once in 2022. Both times, management told me they would handle it. Both times, nothing happened. Sarah was protected because her supervisor, a man named Greg Talbot, covered for her. He dismissed every complaint. He called us troublemakers for filing reports. If someone had listened to us 3 years ago, that little boy would never have been hurt." The video went viral in under 10 minutes, 15 million views by 2:30. The story had just cracked wide open. At 2:19 p.m., Angela Price's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her eyes went wide. She stepped out of Jaylen's room and answered. "This is Angela Price." "Ms. Price, this is Vanessa Cole, associate producer at CNN. Anderson Cooper would like to interview Ms. Carter on tonight's broadcast. We can come to the hospital or arrange a remote setup, whatever works for her. We've also been made aware of the Karen Delgado video, and we'd like to discuss the pattern of behavior at Skyline as part of the segment." Angela pressed the phone against her chest and looked through the door at Rachel, who was reading to Jaylen from a picture book the nurse had brought. She put the phone back to her ear. "I'll speak with my client and get back to you within the hour." At 2:27 p.m., Skyline Airlines issued a second statement. This one was not from Mark Davidson. This one came from the board of directors, and it announced that an internal investigation had been launched into all prior complaints against Sarah Miles and her direct supervisor, Greg Talbot. It confirmed that Talbot had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending the results of the investigation. The statement used words like deeply troubled and systematic failure and commitment to accountability. But the public had heard corporate language before, and they weren't buying it. At 2:33 p.m., Rachel told Angela about CNN. "It's your choice," Angela said, "but I want you to understand what going on national television means. It means Sarah Miles's defense attorney will use every word you say. It means the airline will analyze every expression on your face. It means millions of people will see you, and most of them will support you, but some of them won't. Rachel looked at Jalen. He was awake now, coloring in a book that another nurse had brought. He was using a green crayon to fill in a picture of a dog, pressing hard with his right hand while his left hand trembled against the page. The bruise on his head had turned a dark, angry purple that spread from his temple to just above his ear. Every time Rachel looked at it, she wanted to break something. "I'll do it," Rachel said. "Not for the cameras, not for the attention. I'll do it because somewhere out there's another mother on another plane, and her child is being mistreated, and she's too scared to say anything. I'll do it for her." At 2:41 p.m., Greg Talbot sat in his apartment in Charlotte, watching the news coverage with a bottle of bourbon on the table in front of him. His phone had been ringing non-stop since Karen Delgado's video dropped, and he had stopped answering an hour ago. He had seen the company's statement about his administrative leave. He had seen his name trending on social media alongside Sarah's. And he knew, with the certainty of a man watching his own house burn, that the reports Karen mentioned were real. He had buried them. He had signed off on internal reviews that cleared Sarah because Sarah was efficient and reliable and never called in sick, and because the passengers who complained were, in Greg's judgment, difficult, oversensitive, looking for problems. He poured another glass and drank it in one swallow. His hands were shaking. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "You helped create a monster. That child's blood is on your hands, too." Greg put the phone face down on the table. He stared at the television. The video played again, and this time he watched Sarah's face right before the kick. He saw what everyone else had missed. He saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt for a child who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space where Sarah Miles decided he didn't belong. Greg had seen that look before. He had seen it a dozen times in the reports he buried, and he had done nothing. At 2:55 p.m., the FBI officially opened an investigation into the incident. Because the assault occurred on a commercial aircraft in flight, it fell under federal jurisdiction. A spokesperson for the Atlanta field office confirmed that agents had been assigned and that Sarah Miles could face additional federal charges, including violation of civil rights statutes. Legal analysts on CNN estimated that if convicted on both state and federal charges, Sarah could face up to 35 years in prison. At 3:02 p.m., Dr. Okafor returned to Jalen's room with the results of a follow-up scan. Rachel stood up the moment he walked in. She searched his face for answers before he even opened his mouth. "The concussion is stable," he said. "The swelling hasn't increased, which is good. But I need to be honest with you about something, Ms. Carter. The impact aggravated Jalen's underlying condition. The tremors in his left hand have increased, and we're seeing some irregularities in his neural activity that weren't present in his previous records. This doesn't mean permanent damage, but it means we need to accelerate his treatment. The specialist he was supposed to see, Dr. Amara Williams, I've already contacted her. She's agreed to come here to the hospital tomorrow morning to evaluate him." Rachel grabbed the bed rail to steady herself. "What are you saying? Are you saying the kick made his condition worse?" "I'm saying the trauma from the impact has complicated his neurological picture. How much and for how long, we don't know yet. Dr. Williams will be able to give us a clearer answer after her evaluation." Rachel sat down hard. The room felt like it was spinning. She had brought Jalen to Atlanta to get better. She had spent every dollar she had to put him on that plane. And now, because of one woman's cruelty, her son might be worse than when they started. Angela, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. "Dr. Okafor, can you put that assessment in writing? Specifically, the connection between the assault and the aggravation of Jalen's condition. I'll have a full report ready by tomorrow afternoon." "Thank you." The doctor left. Angela turned to Rachel. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. "Rachel, what you just heard changes everything. This isn't just assault anymore. This is a case where a healthy recovery was stolen from a sick child. Every medical report, every scan, every specialist's opinion from this point forward becomes evidence that Sarah Miles didn't just hurt Jalen in that moment. She may have changed the entire trajectory of his life." Rachel didn't respond. She was looking at Jalen's left hand. It was trembling against the bedsheet, the green crayon still clutched between his fingers, and the tremor was worse than it had been that morning. She could see it. She could measure the difference with her own eyes. Something that should have been getting better was getting worse. And it was because a woman in a blue uniform decided that a sick black child was an inconvenience. At 3:14 p.m., Rachel's sister Denise arrived at the hospital. She had driven 4 hours from Birmingham the moment she saw the video. She walked into Jalen's room, and the moment she saw the bruise on his head, she covered her mouth and turned away so he wouldn't see her cry. Then she pulled herself together, walked to the bed, and kissed Jalen's forehead. "Hey, tough guy. Auntie Dee is here." Jalen smiled for the first time all day. "Auntie Dee, did you bring me anything?" Denise pulled a small stuffed lion from her bag. "I grabbed this from the gift shop downstairs. He's going to protect you while you sleep, okay? His name is King." Jalen held the lion against his chest. "King, I like that." Rachel watched her sister hug her son, and something inside her finally let go. She had been holding everything together since 4:15 that morning, holding it tight, keeping the pieces from scattering. And now that someone else was here, someone who loved Jalen almost as much as she did, she could feel the grip loosening. She walked to the far side of the room and leaned against the wall and let the tears come silently. Denise looked at her over Jalen's head. Their eyes met. Denise mouthed 2 words, "I'm here." Rachel mouthed back, "I know." At 3:29 p.m., Sarah Miles's attorney, a man named Philip Garrett, arrived at the police station and requested a private meeting with his client. He was a defense attorney who had built his reputation on high-profile cases, and he had taken Sarah's case because he knew it would put him on every television screen in America. What he didn't know, not yet, was how bad it truly was. He sat across from Sarah in the interview room. She looked smaller than she had in the morning. Her eyes were red but dry, and she kept rubbing her hands together like she was trying to wash something off them. "Sarah, I need you to tell me the truth. Not the version you gave the detective. The truth. Because I've seen the video, and I've seen Karen Delgado's statement, and I've seen the witness accounts. 14 of them. Every single one says you deliberately kicked that child. If you lie to me, I cannot help you." Sarah stared at the table. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet, Philip had to lean forward to hear her, she said, "He wouldn't stop moving." That's not an answer. He was making noise and kicking, and his mother wouldn't do anything about it, and I lost it. I lost control. "Did you intend to kick him?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I don't know." "You don't know if you intended to kick a 5-year-old child in the head? It happened so fast. I was angry, and he was right there, and my foot just..." "Your foot just what? Decided on its own to make contact with a child's skull?" Sarah flinched. "You said you were here to help me." "I am here to help you, but I cannot build a defense on my foot just." "Sarah, the FBI is involved. There are federal civil rights implications. The medical report on that child is going to come in, and if it shows that your kick caused lasting damage, this goes from bad to catastrophic. I need you to give me something to work with." Sarah looked up at him. Her eyes were empty and flat, and for the first time since the incident, she said something that sounded like the truth. "I didn't like having them on my plane." Philip leaned back in his chair. "Them?" "The mother and the child. From the moment they boarded, she was slow. He was loud. She acted like the whole plane should stop for her. I've dealt with passengers like that before, and I'm tired of it." "Passengers like what?" Sarah caught herself. Her mouth closed. She looked away. Philip closed his folder. "Sarah, I'm going to give you some advice, and I need you to listen carefully. Whatever you're about to say, and I think I know what it is, don't say it again. Not to me, not to the police, not to anyone. Because if what I think you're feeling is what drove you to kick that boy, then this isn't just an assault case. This is a hate crime. And a hate crime in federal court, with the entire country watching, is something I cannot save you from." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin, white line. She said nothing, but her silence said everything. At 3:47 p.m., Anderson Cooper's team arrived at Grady Memorial Hospital to set up for the interview. Rachel had changed into a clean shirt that Denise brought from her car. She sat in a chair beside Jalen's bed, and when the camera turned on, she looked directly into the lens and spoke with a voice that did not waver. "My son's name is Jalen Carter. He is 5 years old. He has a neurological condition that makes his body do things he can't control. I put him on that plane because I couldn't afford any other way to get him to a doctor who could help him. And a woman who was supposed to keep us safe decided that my son was a problem. She called me people like you. She told me to be grateful. And then she kicked my baby in the head so hard that he blacked out. I am not here for sympathy. I am not here for money. I am here because what happened to Jalen happens to Black families every day in spaces where we're supposed to be treated equally. It happens quietly. It happens behind closed doors. It happens when nobody is filming. Today, 14 people were filming, and the world saw what we've always known. Our children are not safe in the hands of people who see them as less than human. The interview aired at 8 p.m. Eastern. 41 million people watched it live. It was the most viewed CNN segment in 3 years. And somewhere in a holding cell in Atlanta, Sarah Miles watched it on a mounted television she couldn't turn off, and she heard every single word. At 9:17 p.m., the GoFundMe for Jalen's medical care crossed $2 million. By midnight, it would reach $3.7 million. Donations came from every state and 32 countries. A retired teacher in Ohio sent $50 and wrote, "For Jalen, because every child deserves to be treated with dignity." A grandmother in London sent £100 and wrote, "I held my grandchildren tonight and cried for yours." At 9:44 p.m., Jalen woke up from a deep sleep. His mother was beside him, as she had been all day, her hand on his chest, her eyes closed, but not sleeping. He reached up and touched her face. "Mama, I'm here, baby. The lion is keeping me safe. Auntie Dee said he would." Rachel smiled through tears she didn't even know were falling. "King is doing a very good job." "Mama, is the lady going to come back?" Rachel took his hand. She held it tight. She looked him in the eye. "No, baby, she is never coming back. And nobody is ever going to hurt you like that again. Not while I'm breathing." Jalen held King the lion against his chest and closed his eyes. His left hand was still trembling. The bruise on his head was still dark. The monitor still beeped its steady rhythm. But he believed his mother. He believed her because she had never lied to him, and she wasn't going to start now. Rachel stayed awake. She watched her son sleep, and she listened to the world outside the hospital room. The buzz of her phone, the murmur of nurses in the hallway, the distant sound of a city that was still talking about her boy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what the specialist would say. She didn't know how long the fight ahead would last. But she knew one thing. She knew it with every fiber of her being, with every beat of her heart, with the same certainty she had felt the moment she first held Jalen in her arms. She was not going to lose. 3 weeks after the kick heard around the world, Sarah Miles stood in front of a mirror in her sister's apartment and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair, once always pulled tight and controlled, hung loose around a face that had aged 10 years in 21 days. She had lost 11 pounds. She couldn't eat without her stomach rejecting whatever she put in it. She couldn't sleep without waking up to the sound of a child's scream that existed only in her memory. Her phone number had been leaked online, and she had changed it 4 times, but the threats kept finding her. She had been evicted from her apartment after her landlord received a petition from every other tenant in the building demanding she be removed. Her bank account had been frozen pending the civil lawsuit. Her own mother had called her once, 3 days after the incident, and said only 6 words before hanging up. "I didn't raise you like this." Sarah pressed her forehead against the mirror and whispered to no one, "I didn't mean for this to happen." But nobody was listening anymore. Nobody had been listening since the moment Detective Howard closed his folder and walked out of that interrogation room. The only person who still took her calls was her court-appointed attorney, a tired man named Dennis Woodrow, who had made it very clear on their first meeting that he wasn't interested in her excuses. Ms. Miles, Dennis had told her, sitting across a metal table in the county jail after her arraignment, I've watched the video. The jury is going to watch the video. The judge is going to watch the video. There's no version of your defense that starts with, it was an accident. That door is closed. We need to find another door, and right now, I'm not seeing one. Sarah had stared at him. So what are you saying? I'm saying the prosecution has 14 camera angles, 37 passenger statements, and a 5-year-old victim with a pre-existing neurological condition who now has additional brain trauma that may be permanent. I'm saying the state of Georgia is charging you with felony aggravated assault on a minor, and the federal government is adding charges of assault aboard an aircraft. Combined, you're looking at 25 to 30 years. 30 years, Sarah had repeated, and the words tasted like poison. Unless we negotiate. The DA might consider a plea, but that depends entirely on what you're willing to admit. Sarah had said nothing for a long time. Then she asked, what about Skyline? Are they backing me at all? Dennis had almost laughed. Ms. Miles, Skyline is running as far from you as humanly possible. They've already settled preliminary terms with the family's attorney. They're cooperating with the FBI. Your employee file has been turned over to the prosecution. And I should tell you, there are things in that file that are going to make your defense significantly harder. What things? 3 prior complaints from passengers, all people of color, all alleging hostile treatment. One from 2 years ago described you as, and I'm quoting the complaint, aggressive, dismissive, and racially motivated in her interactions. Skyline investigated and cleared you each time, but now those complaints are going to be Exhibit A through C in establishing a pattern of behavior. Sarah's face had gone white. Those were handled. Those were dismissed. They were dismissed by an internal review board that didn't want the paperwork. That's not the same as dismissed by a jury. That conversation had taken place 2 weeks ago. Since then, Sarah had been released on bail, paid by her sister Karen, who had put up her house as collateral and hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Sarah since. Karen let her stay in the spare bedroom. She left food in the refrigerator, but she didn't eat with Sarah. She didn't watch television with Sarah. And at night, when Sarah could hear Karen's husband Michael talking in low, angry tones through the wall, she knew that her presence in their home was tearing her sister's marriage apart. On this morning, 22 days after the incident, Sarah heard the front door open and close. Karen's footsteps came down the hallway and stopped outside her room. There was a knock. "Sarah, come out here. You need to see this." Sarah opened the door. Karen stood in the hallway holding her phone, and her face carried the expression of someone delivering a death sentence. She held the phone out and said, "The family did a press conference. It's everywhere." Sarah took the phone and pressed play. Angela Price stood behind a podium lined with microphones. Beside her stood Rachel Carter, wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her face composed with the kind of dignity that comes from having survived the worst thing imaginable and choosing to stand up anyway. And beside Rachel, in a wheelchair with a bandage still visible on the left side of his head, sat Jalen. Angela spoke first. 22 days ago, a woman entrusted with the safety of passengers aboard a commercial aircraft made a choice. She chose violence against a defenseless child. Today, we are announcing that the Carter family is filing a civil lawsuit against Sarah Miles and Skyline Airlines for $75 million. But more importantly, we are here because Jalen Carter has something he wants to say. The cameras tightened on Jalen. Rachel leaned down and adjusted the microphone on the podium to his height. Jalen looked at the cameras, and his eyes, those big brown eyes that the world had first seen filled with confusion and pain in a viral video, were clear and steady. "My name is Jalen Carter. I'm 5 years old. I was sick on the airplane, and the lady kicked me in my head. It hurt really bad. My mama told me I didn't do anything wrong. I want everybody to know that hitting kids is not okay, even when they're sick, even when they're being loud. You're not supposed to hurt kids. That's the rule." Sarah stopped the video. Her hand was shaking. She gave the phone back to Karen and said nothing. Karen waited for a response, a reaction, something. When none came, she shook her head and walked away. At 9:47 a.m. that same morning, the phone in Rachel's hotel room rang. Angela's voice was sharp with urgency. "Rachel, I just got off the phone with the DA's office. They're convening a grand jury next week. And there's something else, something big." "What?" "A former colleague of Sarah Miles came forward this morning, another flight attendant who worked with her for 3 years. She's willing to testify that Sarah made repeated racist comments about passengers of color and that she witnessed Sarah physically shove an elderly black woman into a seat 2 years ago during a flight from Dallas to Miami. The incident was never reported because the woman was afraid." Rachel closed her eyes. How many people did she do this to before Jalen? That's what we're going to find out. My office has received 11 calls in the last 4 days from former passengers claiming they had negative encounters with Sarah Miles. 6 of them involve racial slurs or racially charged language. 3 of them involve physical intimidation. We're vetting each one, but Rachel, this is a pattern, a clear, documented pattern of someone who targeted vulnerable people and got away with it because nobody held the airline accountable. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed. Jalen was watching cartoons in the next room, his laughter drifting through the open door. That sound, his laughter, was the only thing keeping her anchored. "Angela, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Is Jalen going to have to testify? In court? In front of her?" Angela paused. "The prosecution would like him to. A child's testimony in a case like this is incredibly powerful. But I've spoken with them, and they understand the situation. Jalen's medical condition, the trauma he's already experienced. If you don't want him in that courtroom, we can fight it. His video statement and medical records may be enough." "He has nightmares every night, Angela. Every single night. He wakes up screaming and asks me if the lady is on the airplane again. He won't go near anyone in a uniform, not even the nurses at the hospital. Do you understand what that means? My son is afraid of people who are supposed to help him. I understand, and I promise you we will protect him, whatever you decide." Rachel looked toward the room where Jalen was laughing at a cartoon. "He's going to testify," she said quietly. "Rachel, he's going to testify because he needs to look at that woman and know that she doesn't have power over him. He needs to say what happened in his own words and know that people are listening. He's 5 years old, and he already knows what it feels like to be hurt by someone who was supposed to keep him safe. The least I can do is let him stand up and tell his truth." Angela was quiet for a moment. "You are the strongest person I've ever met, Rachel Carter." "I'm not strong. I'm angry, and I'm using it." At 10:33 a.m., 200 miles away in Charlotte, Mark Davidson sat in his office reading a report that made his hands tremble. Skyline's internal investigation had been completed, and the findings were devastating. Sarah Miles had received 3 formal complaints over 4 years, all from passengers of color, all alleging discriminatory treatment. Each complaint had been investigated by the airline's internal review board, and each one had been closed with no action taken. The review board's notes described the complaints as unsubstantiated and likely exaggerated. In one case, the board member who reviewed the complaint wrote that the passenger was probably oversensitive. That passenger was a 73-year-old retired school teacher who had been spoken to so harshly by Sarah Miles that she had cried for the remainder of the flight. Mark read the report twice. Then he called Linda Chen into his office. "Who was on the review board for these complaints?" Linda pulled up the records. For all 3, the senior reviewer was Thomas Garrett, VP of Employee Relations. "Where is Garrett now?" "He's still in the building, 3rd floor." "Not for long. Fire him today. And Linda, I want every complaint filed against any Skyline employee in the last 10 years re-examined by an outside firm. Every single one. I don't care if there are 1,000 of them. We missed this. We missed it 3 times, and a child paid the price. That stops now." Linda nodded and left. Mark sat alone in his office and stared at the photograph on his desk, his wife and his son at the beach, smiling. He picked it up and held it for a long time. At 11:15 a.m., the news broke that Skyline Airlines had fired its VP of Employee Relations for failing to act on complaints against Sarah Miles. The story exploded immediately. What had started as a single incident on a single flight was now unraveling into a systemic failure, a pattern of ignored warnings and protected employees and passengers whose voices had been silenced by a company more interested in convenience than justice. At 11:28 a.m., the first protest appeared outside Skyline's headquarters in Charlotte. It started with 30 people holding signs that read, "Justice for Jalen" and "Skyline Protects Abusers." By noon, there were 300. By 1 p.m., over 1,000. At 11:41 a.m., Sarah Miles learned about the protests from the television in her sister's living room. She stood in the doorway, watching the crowd grow, watching her name appear on signs carried by strangers who hated her for something she couldn't undo. Karen walked past her without a word, grabbed her car keys, and left the house. Sarah sat down on the couch. The television anchor was interviewing one of the protesters, an older black woman with gray hair and glasses. The woman looked directly into the camera and said, "This isn't just about Sarah Miles. This is about every flight attendant, every airline worker, every person in a position of authority who has ever looked at a black child and decided that child was a problem to be dealt with instead of a human being to be cared for. We're not leaving until Skyline takes real responsibility, not just firing people, but changing the system that allowed this to happen." Sarah picked up the remote and turned off the television. She sat in the silence and stared at the blank screen. And for the first time since the incident, something broke through the wall she had built around herself. Not remorse exactly. Something closer to the sickening realization that the woman on the television was right and that she, Sarah Miles, had become the face of something much larger than one moment on one airplane. Her phone rang. Dennis Woodrow. She answered. "Sarah, we have a problem. A big one." "What now?" "The DA just added a hate crime enhancement to your charges. Based on the witness testimony about your prior comments and the pattern of complaints, they're arguing this was a racially motivated attack. If convicted with the enhancement, you're looking at 35 to 40 years. Sarah couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, but no air came in. The room tilted sideways, and she grabbed the arm of the couch to keep from falling. 40 years? Dennis, I'll be 80 years old. I'll die in prison. Which is why we need to talk about a plea deal. Seriously this time, Sarah. No more deflecting. No more claiming it was an accident. The DA is willing to meet, but only if you're prepared to plead guilty to the assault and accept the racial bias finding. And if I plead guilty, we might get it down to 8 to 12 years, maybe less with good behavior. 8 years. It's better than 40, Sarah. She hung up and sat there. 8 years. 8 years in a cell for something that took less than 2 seconds. She kept telling herself it happened fast, that she didn't think, that she just reacted. But the truth, the one she couldn't say out loud, the one she couldn't even admit to her own attorney, was that she had thought about it. Not for long, maybe only for a second. But in that second, she had looked at that small black boy with his loud coughing and his twitching legs, and his mother who had the nerve to ask for things. And she had made a choice. She chose to use her foot instead of her words. She chose violence against a child. And the reason, the real reason, buried under all the excuses and the denials and the dry-eyed performances, was that she saw Jalen Carter as less than a passenger, less than a child, less than human. And she had spent 6 years in the airline industry, surrounded by people who never challenged that, who dismissed the complaints and looked the other way, and let her believe that her cruelty was just efficiency. At 1:44 p.m., Rachel sat in Jalen's hospital room while Dr. Okafor delivered the results of the latest round of tests. The concussion is healing, he said, but we're seeing some concerning changes in his neurological scans. The impact appears to have accelerated the progression of his underlying condition. I want to be transparent with you, Ms. Carter. The specialist, Dr. Adeyemi, has reviewed the scans and she believes the kick caused additional damage to an area of the brain that was already compromised. Rachel gripped the arms of her chair. What does that mean for his treatment? It means the treatment plan we originally discussed may no longer be sufficient. Jalen is going to need a more aggressive approach. possibly surgery, definitely ongoing therapy. Dr. Adeyemi wants to meet with you this afternoon to discuss options. Surgery. Rachel said the word like she was swallowing glass. He's 5. He's 5 years old. I know, and I wish I had better news, but I want you to know that Dr. Adeyemi is the best in the country. If anyone can help Jalen, she can. Rachel nodded. She waited until Dr. Okafor left the room, and then she put her face in her hands and let the weight of it crush her. The kick hadn't just hurt Jalen in the moment. It had changed the trajectory of his entire life. Whatever chance he had at a simpler recovery, a less invasive treatment, a childhood that included running and playing and not sitting in hospitals, Sarah Miles had taken that from him with one swing of her foot. At 2:09 p.m., Angela called. Rachel, the grand jury convened early. They've returned an indictment. Sarah Miles has been formally charged with felony aggravated assault on a minor, assault aboard an aircraft, and a hate crime enhancement. The trial date has been set for 8 weeks from now. Rachel took a breath. Good. There's something else. Dennis Woodrow, Sarah's attorney, has reached out about a potential plea deal. They want to negotiate. What are they offering? She pleads guilty to all charges. The DA recommends 12 years, possibility of parole after 8. No trial. Rachel was quiet for a long time. She looked at Jalen, who was asleep in the hospital bed with a stuffed bear tucked under his arm, a gift from a stranger who had sent it to the hospital with a note that said, "For the bravest boy in America." His head was turned to the side and she could see the scar where the swelling had been, fading now, but still visible, a mark that would stay with him long after the bruise healed. No deal, Rachel said. Rachel, a trial will be difficult. Jalen might have to testify. It could drag on for months. I said no deal. She doesn't get to plead guilty in a quiet room and disappear into a prison where nobody sees her. She sits in that courtroom. She faces that jury. She looks at my son and she hears what she took from him. And then 12 people decide what she deserves. Not her lawyer, not the DA, the people. Angela was quiet for a beat. I'll inform the DA. Angela? Yes? Tell them we'll see her in court. At 3:17 p.m., news outlets reported that the Carter family had rejected Sarah Miles's plea deal. The story dominated every network. Legal analysts debated the decision. Some called it bold. Some called it risky. But on social media, the response was overwhelming and unified. Millions of people posted the same message with the same hashtag. See you in court. Justice for Jalen. At 3:42 p.m., in the spare bedroom of her sister's apartment, Sarah Miles heard the news. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. No plea deal, no negotiation, no way out. She was going to trial. She was going to sit in a courtroom and watch that video play on a screen in front of 12 strangers who would decide the rest of her life. She was going to look at Jalen Carter and his mother and see the damage she caused, reflected back at her like a mirror she couldn't break. Her sister knocked on the door. Sarah didn't answer. Karen opened it anyway. She stood in the doorway and looked at Sarah for a long time. Then she said something she had been holding in since the day Sarah showed up at her door with a suitcase and ruined eyes. Sarah, I love you because you're my sister, but I need you to hear me. What you did was evil. Not a mistake, not an accident. Evil. That little boy will carry what you did for the rest of his life, and so will his mother. And I cannot stand in front of God and pretend that doesn't matter because we share the same blood. I'll keep a roof over your head until the trial because that's what family does. But I need you to stop lying. Stop lying to your lawyer. Stop lying to yourself. And if you get on that stand and you say it was an accident one more time, I will walk out of that courtroom and I will never speak to you again. Sarah looked at her sister, and for the first time since the day it happened, real tears fell from her eyes. Not the practiced kind, not the performative kind, the kind that burn because they've been held back too long. I don't know how to be the person who did that, she whispered. I don't know how to live in a world where I'm the woman who kicked a child. Karen's voice didn't soften. You don't get to not know. You did it. Now you live with it. She closed the door. Sarah sat alone, The tears kept falling. Outside, the sun was going down, and somewhere in Atlanta, a 5-year-old boy was eating chocolate pudding in a hospital bed and asking his mother if the doctor could fix the part of his brain that made his legs not listen. And Rachel was smiling at him and saying, "Yes, baby, that's exactly what she's going to do," while her heart broke quietly into pieces so small she wasn't sure she'd ever find them all. The trial was 8 weeks away. The whole country was watching. And the truth, the whole ugly truth, hadn't even come out yet. 8 weeks passed like a slow fire burning through everything it touched. The country didn't forget. The country couldn't forget. Jalen Carter's face was on magazine covers, on murals painted on the sides of buildings in Detroit and Atlanta and Los Angeles, on T-shirts worn by strangers who had never met him but who carried his name like a prayer. The hashtag Justice for Jalen had been used over 200 million times. It had become more than a hashtag. It had become a demand. And on a Monday morning in late October, that demand walked through the doors of the Fulton County Superior Courthouse and took its seat. Rachel arrived at 7:45 a.m. She wore a navy blue dress that she had bought at a thrift store 3 days earlier because she didn't own anything appropriate for court. Angela had offered to buy her something, but Rachel had refused. "I've been dressing myself and my son our whole lives. I'm not going to stop now." She held Jalen's hand as they walked through the front entrance. He was wearing khaki pants and a white button-down shirt and shoes that Rachel had polished the night before while he slept. The scar on the side of his head was visible, a faded pink line that curved from his temple to just above his ear. He walked slowly. His balance had gotten worse since the incident, a result of the additional brain damage that Dr. Adiemi had confirmed in her report. He needed physical therapy twice a week. He had trouble with stairs. He couldn't run without falling. But he walked into that courthouse on his own 2 feet, and he held his mother's hand, and he didn't look down. The courtroom filled quickly. Every seat was taken by 8:15. Reporters packed the back rows. 3 sketch artists sat along the side wall. The judge, Honorable Patricia Monroe, entered at 8:30 sharp and called the court to order. She was 62 years old with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for running the tightest courtroom in Georgia. She looked out at the packed gallery and said, "This is a court of law, not a theater. I expect silence from the gallery. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Is that understood?" The room murmured its agreement. Sarah Miles was brought in at 8:33. She entered through a side door flanked by 2 officers. She was wearing a gray suit that hung loose on her thin frame. Her hair was pulled back, but not tight like it used to be. She looked smaller than Rachel remembered, smaller and older and emptied out, like someone had scooped out everything that used to hold her together and left only the shell. Sarah sat down beside Dennis Woodrow and folded her hands on the table and did not look at the gallery. She did not look at Rachel. She did not look at Jalen. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb, a man built like a linebacker with a voice that could fill a stadium without a microphone. He stood in front of the jury and spoke for 14 minutes, and in those 14 minutes, he dismantled Sarah Miles piece by piece. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. On September 14th of this year, a 5-year-old boy named Jalen Carter boarded a plane with his mother. He was sick. He was scared. He was on his way to see a doctor who might be able to help him live a normal life, and a woman whose job it was to keep him safe, a woman trained and certified and paid to ensure the well-being of every passenger on that aircraft, chose to kick that child in the head. Not accidentally, not reflexively, deliberately. You will see 14 videos from 14 different angles. You will hear from 37 witnesses. You will hear from the doctors who treated Jalen and who will tell you that the damage inflicted by Sarah Miles has permanently altered the course of this child's medical prognosis. And you will hear from former passengers and former colleagues who will tell you that this was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of racially motivated hostility that was ignored, excused, and enabled by an airline that chose its convenience over the safety of its most vulnerable passengers. Dennis Woodrow's opening was shorter. He stood before the jury and took a different approach, one that surprised everyone in the courtroom. "My client is guilty of what she did. She kicked a child. That is not in dispute. What I ask you to consider as this trial unfolds is the full picture of how we arrived at this moment, a system that failed to train, failed to monitor, and failed to intervene long before September 14th. Sarah Miles is responsible for her actions, but she is not the only one responsible. Rachel watched Dennis speak and felt a heat rise in her chest. He was trying to spread the blame. He was trying to make Sarah a symptom instead of the disease. She leaned over to Angela and whispered, "He's going to make her the victim." Angela shook her head. "He's going to try. He won't succeed." The prosecution called its first witness at 9:12 a.m., Maria Santos, the flight attendant who had rushed to help Jalen after the kick. Maria took the stand and recounted everything she saw, her voice steady until she reached the moment she knelt beside Jalen and saw the swelling on his head. Then her voice cracked. "He was so still. For a second, I thought she had killed him. His eyes were rolled back and he wasn't moving, and I have a son the same age, and I just kept thinking, that could be my baby. That could be my child lying there." The jury watched the videos at 9:41 a.m. All 14 of them played one after another on a large screen positioned so that everyone in the courtroom could see. The first video drew gasps from the gallery. By the fifth video, a juror in the back row was crying. By the 14th, the courtroom was so quiet that the sound of Sarah Miles' breathing was audible. She sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead, while the screen showed her foot connecting with a child's skull over and over and over from every conceivable angle. Judge Monroe called a 15-minute recess at 10:20. Rachel took Jalen into the hallway and sat him on a bench. He looked up at her and said, "Mama, why are all those people crying in there?" "Because they care about you, baby. A lot of people care about you." "Is the lady in there? The one who hurt me?" "Yes, she's in there." Jalen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is she scared?" Rachel looked at her son, 5 years old, and asking if the woman who kicked him in the head was scared. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh or scream. "I think so, Jalen. I think she's very scared." "Good," he said. And then, just as quickly, he added, "But I don't want her to be scared forever. Just long enough to know how I felt." Rachel pulled him close and held him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that could match the wisdom of a 5-year-old boy who understood justice better than most adults ever would. At 10:51 a.m., the prosecution called the witness that changed everything. Her name was Denise Williams. She was 47 years old, and she had been a flight attendant at Skyline for 9 years. She had worked alongside Sarah Miles for 3 of those years, and she had come forward voluntarily to tell the truth. Denise sat in the witness chair and looked directly at Marcus Webb. "I saw things," she said. "For 3 years, I saw things and I said nothing, and that is something I will carry for the rest of my life." "Ms. Williams, can you describe the behavior you witnessed from the defendant?" "Sarah had a way of sorting people. That's the only word I can use. She sorted them. If you were white, well-dressed, polite, she was professional. She smiled. She was efficient. But if you were black or Latino or spoke with an accent or looked like you didn't belong in her version of what a passenger should be, she changed. Her tone changed. Her body language changed. She became cold, dismissive, sometimes cruel. Can you give the jury a specific example?" Denise took a breath. 2 years ago, on a flight from Dallas to Miami, there was an elderly black woman, maybe 70, 75 years old. She was having trouble finding her seat. She was confused. She kept walking up and down the aisle. Sarah walked up behind her and grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her into a seat that wasn't even hers. The woman hit the armrest so hard she had a bruise on her hip. I saw it later when the woman showed me in the lavatory. She was crying. She asked me if she had done something wrong. The courtroom went completely still. "Did you report this?" Marcus asked. Denise's eyes filled with tears. "No, and I hate myself for it. Sarah told me the woman was being difficult and that she handled it. She told me that if I reported it, it would be my word against hers, and she had seniority. I was afraid of losing my job. I had 2 kids at home. I chose silence. And when I saw the video of what she did to Jalen Carter, I knew that my silence had a cost, and that little boy paid it. A sound moved through the gallery. Not a gasp, not a murmur, but something deeper. A collective exhale of grief and recognition. 3 jurors were now openly crying. Dennis Woodrow sat at the defense table with his pen frozen above his notepad. Sarah Miles stared at the table in front of her, and for the first time during the trial, her shoulders began to shake. At 11:38 a.m., the prosecution rested its case. Marcus Webb stood and said, "The people rest, Your Honor." He sat down and looked at the jury, and he didn't need to say another word. The evidence had spoken for itself. Dennis Woodrow called 2 witnesses for the defense. The first was a psychologist who testified that Sarah had experienced extreme stress and emotional dysregulation at the time of the incident. The second was Sarah's former supervisor, who described her as generally professional and well regarded by colleagues. Neither testimony landed. The jury listened politely, but their eyes kept drifting to Jalen, who sat in the front row of the gallery between his mother and Angela, his small legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. At 1:15 p.m., after the lunch recess, the prosecution called its final witness, Jalen Carter. The courtroom held its breath as Rachel walked Jalen to the front. He climbed into the witness chair, and the bailiff had to bring a cushion so he could see over the railing. Judge Monroe leaned down and spoke to him gently. "Jalen, do you know what it means to tell the truth?" "Yes, ma'am. It means you say what really happened, not what you wish happened." "That's exactly right. Can you promise me you'll tell the truth today?" "I promise." Marcus Webb approached the stand slowly. He knelt down so he was eye level with Jalen. "Jalen, I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? If you don't understand something, just tell me, and I'll ask it a different way." "Okay." "Jalen, do you remember the airplane ride?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what you remember?" Jalen looked at his mother. Rachel nodded. He turned back to Marcus. "I was sick. My head hurt real bad, and my legs kept moving, and I couldn't make them stop. My mama told the lady I was sick, but the lady was mean. She kept coming back and saying I was being bad, but I wasn't being bad. My body was just not listening to me." "And then what happened, Jalen?" The boy went quiet. His hands gripped the edge of the witness box. His eyes moved across the courtroom and landed on Sarah Miles for the first time. He stared at her. She stared back. And in that moment, the entire world narrowed down to the space between a 5-year-old boy and the woman who had hurt him. "She kicked me," Jalen said, "in my head. Really hard. And then everything went dark, and I couldn't hear my mama anymore, and I was really scared because I thought I was going to die." A juror in the front row put her hand over her mouth. Another one lowered his head. "Jalen, how do you feel now? Are you better?" "Some parts are better. My head doesn't hurt as much, but the doctor said the kick made my brain more sick. I have to go to the doctor a lot now. I can't run anymore because I fall down, and I have bad dreams every night about the lady on the airplane." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Jalen. You're very brave." Dennis Woodrow stood for cross-examination. He looked at Jalen, and then he looked at the jury, and then he sat back down. "No questions, Your Honor." It was the smartest thing he'd done in the entire trial. There was nothing he could ask a 5-year-old boy that wouldn't destroy his client further. At 2:20 p.m., closing arguments began. Marcus Webb stood before the jury one final time. You've seen the videos, you've heard the witnesses, you've heard from the doctors, and you've heard from Jalen himself. This child came to Atlanta to find healing, and instead, he found violence. Sarah Miles didn't just kick a boy in the head. She kicked him because of who he was. She kicked him because of what he looked like. She kicked him because she had been kicking people like him in smaller, quieter ways for years, and nobody stopped her. Today, you can stop her. Today, you can tell Jalen Carter and every child like him that this country sees them, hears them, and will protect them. Find Sarah Miles guilty, because she is. Dennis Woodrow's closing was brief. My client did a terrible thing. She knows it, she accepts it. I'm not here to tell you she's innocent. I'm here to ask you to consider the full weight of what happened, not just the kick, but the system that allowed it. Sarah Miles is one person. The failure is much larger than her. I trust you'll weigh that as you deliberate. The jury was dismissed to deliberate at 3:02 p.m. Rachel sat in the hallway with Jalen on her lap and waited. Angela paced back and forth. Mark Davidson, who had flown from Charlotte to attend the trial in person, sat 3 benches away, his head bowed. 1 hour passed. Then 2. At 5:11 p.m., the bailiff stepped into the hallway. The jury has reached a verdict. Rachel's heart stopped. She looked at Angela. Angela reached out and took her hand. Whatever happens, we did everything we could. They filed back into the courtroom. The jury took their seats. Sarah Miles stood beside Dennis Woodrow. Her hands were shaking. Judge Monroe spoke. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman with steady eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of felony aggravated assault on a minor, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the charge of assault aboard an aircraft? Guilty. On the hate crime enhancement? Guilty. Sarah Miles swayed on her feet. Dennis Woodrow reached out and steadied her. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there, absorbing the word guilty like blows to the body, one after another, after another. Judge Monroe set sentencing for 2 weeks later. On that day, she looked at Sarah Miles across the courtroom and said, Ms. Miles, the actions you committed were not a momentary lapse in judgment. They were the product of a mindset that viewed certain human beings as less deserving of dignity and care. A 5-year-old child who was already fighting for his life was subjected to violence by someone entrusted with his safety. This court has a duty to ensure that the punishment reflects not just the severity of the crime, but the message this nation needs to send. I am sentencing you to 22 years in federal prison. Sarah's knees buckled. The officers caught her. She was led out of the courtroom without a word. Rachel sat perfectly still. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She looked at Jalen, who was drawing circles on a piece of paper Angela had given him. He looked up at her and said, Is it over, Mama? It's over, baby. Can we go see the doctor now? The one who's going to help my brain? Rachel laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep and good and unbroken. Yes, Jalen, we can go see the doctor now. They walked out of the courthouse together. The sun hit their faces, and a crowd of hundreds erupted in cheers. People were chanting Jalen's name. Strangers were crying. Cameras flashed from every direction. Rachel held her son on her hip and walked through the crowd. And she didn't wave. She didn't pose. She didn't perform. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, the same way she had walked through the airport that morning 8 weeks ago, holding her child and refusing to stop. In the weeks that followed, Skyline Airlines settled the civil lawsuit for $68 million. $40 million went into a trust for Jalen's lifelong medical care. $20 million funded the creation of the Jalen Carter Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the rights of passengers with disabilities. The remaining $8 million went to Rachel, who used part of it to buy a small house in Atlanta, 3 blocks from Dr. Adeyemi's clinic. Jalen had his surgery 4 months after the trial. It lasted 7 hours. Rachel sat in the waiting room the entire time, not pacing, not scrolling through her phone, just sitting with her hands folded and her eyes closed, talking to God or whoever was listening. When Dr. Adeyemi came out and said the surgery was successful, Rachel dropped to her knees on the hospital floor and wept. 6 months after the surgery, Jalen Carter ran for the first time in almost a year. It wasn't fast. It wasn't graceful. He stumbled twice and laughed both times. Rachel stood at the edge of the yard and watched him, her hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heart beat so hard she thought it might come through her skin. "Mama, look!" Jalen shouted, his arms spread wide, his face split open with the biggest grin she had ever seen. "I'm running! My legs are listening!" Rachel couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She just stood there, watching her son run in the sunlight, and she let the tears fall, because some tears aren't sad. Some tears are just the body's way of saying, "Thank God, we made it. We actually made it." Skyline Airlines implemented mandatory bias training for every employee. They created an independent review board for passenger complaints. They hired Denise Williams as their new head of passenger advocacy. And at every training session, in every new hire orientation, they played a video. Not the video of the kick, the video of Jalen at the press conference, looking into the camera with those clear brown eyes and saying, "You're not supposed to hurt kids. That's the rule." Sarah Miles began serving her sentence at a federal facility in Tallahassee. She did not appeal. In her first year, she wrote a letter to Rachel Carter. It was 11 pages long. Rachel read it once. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The letter didn't change what happened. Nothing could change what happened. But Rachel folded it neatly and put it in a drawer because she believed that even the worst people carry something worth acknowledging, even if that something is just the weight of knowing what they've done. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Rachel and Jalen stood together at a podium in Washington, D.C. 12 senators and 47 members of Congress sat in the audience. Rachel spoke for 7 minutes. She told them about waking up at 4:15 in the morning and pressing her hand against her son's forehead. She told them about scraping together money for plane tickets. She told them about asking for warm water and being told to be grateful. And she told them that the law they were about to pass, the Jalen Carter Passenger Protection Act, was not about one flight attendant or one airline or one moment caught on camera. It was about every child who ever sat in a seat too big for them on a plane, flying somewhere they hoped would be better, trusting that the adults around them would keep them safe. Jalen stood beside her. He was 6 now. He was taller. His balance was better. His brain was healing, slowly, on its own timeline, the way all healing happens. He looked out at the crowd and he didn't see senators or cameras or history being made. He saw people, and people were supposed to take care of each other. That was the rule. The bill passed unanimously. Rachel took Jalen's hand and they walked out of the building together, the same way they had walked into that airport a year ago, the same way they had walked off that plane, the same way they had walked out of that courthouse. Together, unbroken, moving forward. And the world, for all its cruelty and all its failure, watched a mother and her son and remembered what it looked like when ordinary people refused to be silent, refused to be small, and refused to let the worst moment of their lives be the last word. It never was. It never will be. Because Jalen Carter is running now. His legs are listening. And so is the rest of the world.